Jamie, right? So we're in a very interesting time in humanity. The internet, AI, conversations, echo chambers, all the trends, right? We're going to talk about the current state of the internet, where we are right now, and the subcultures that exist within it. But before we do all of that, it'll be great as an introduction for the guests that do not know about your work. Can you tell us about your work, what you've been up to? And then we'll dive into the bottlenecks that you've been solving and that you've seen from the start of your career till the year is 2026.
Right. Thanks for having me. I guess for the last 15 years, I've just been trying to explain what strange things have been going on in our digital universe to pretty much to ordinary people. Mm-hmm. But there's always these huge changes in technology happening. And about 2 to 3 years later, or sort of the ordinary person is sort of the wave hits them and they don't know what's going on. And I feel like I'm always trying to be like 1 year ahead of that wave that's hitting the ordinary. I see what's going on and I can try and work out what it means for people and then explain it. Because so much really about what technology does to the world is not about the tech, like the specifics of machine learning or the specifics of how darknet encryption works. It's what happens when people are using that. Mm-hmm. How does it change our behavior? How does it change how we relate to each other, how we understand information, how we understand politics, media? So that's been my thing throughout. And I've just always been fascinated by the weird subcultures that are often foretelling how the rest of us will behave. So I actually started working on the way I got into this is so weird, right? It's so weird. 2009, there is this football hooligan group called the English Defence League going around different cities doing offline protests about immigration, Islam and stuff like that, led by Tommy Robinson. And I realised this was not an offline football hooligan group. This was a Facebook group with a tiny militant offline wing. And I thought, I wonder how I could get to the Facebook group, because the Facebook group was huge. It was bigger than the political parties. It was massive, and no one's looking at that. So I think, what if I run a Facebook advert, like you would trying to sell jeans, targeting supporters of the English Defence League, and rather than selling them something, I'll ask them to fill in a survey about their opinions. I'll spend £20 on this on Friday night, come back on Monday morning. 1,000 members of the EDL had filled in my survey. Wow. I was like, the digital world is offering us an amazing way to get to people that you'd never see, you'd never meet, you'd never find, would never talk to you. And it's also changing the way political movements are being shaped. And from that point on, I was working on online conspiracies. I wrote about, I set up a research group looking at AI in 2010. I wrote a book about the darknet in 2014, where I was, spending loads of time on internet, like weird subcultures, neo-Nazi forums, darknet drugs markets, eating disorder forums, meeting the people that were part of them. And it just kind of went on from that. I did a podcast for the BBC about the missing crypto queen, biggest crypto Ponzi scam in history that we uncovered. So I'm going on and on because that shows how old I am. I've been around for so long. It's like when you scroll the date when you try to book a ticket.
Days of birth, and it gets longer and longer. Could they just start in 1980?
Surely AI.
Just to be kind to us.
AI could sort of do a screen grab and be like, let's start him off somewhere a bit closer to his date of birth. Save him some time. And then most recently, I've written this book called How to Talk to AI and How Not to, about these language models that seemingly overnight have turned up and suddenly 1 billion people around the world are using them constantly for everything and really don't understand them. Do not know how they work, what they do, their strengths, their limits, nothing. So it's been pretty wild, actually.
Yes. So how did we get here? Because you see a constant trend. For example, there was the dot-com boom and the internet, what was happening, and social came about. And then what you get is you always get what I like to call like the nerds and the enthusiasts that started off, right? And I'm like right now I'm in an echo chamber where I believe that everybody is like experimenting and building stuff on Claude. And then I go outside of that echo chamber and I speak to everybody else and they don't even know what I'm speaking about, right? And I've seen that trend happen with social and I've seen that trend happen again with AI. Crypto, we're talking about the crypto queen. And then I'm seeing the same thing happening again with AI. And what happens is you get a small bunch of people that are early, they do some stuff, everybody else hears about it, but they stay in a hole, and then it impacts them. And then the next thing comes in, same trend. Why does that seem to happen that way?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I've always found, like when I was working on the dark net, the thing I found was that it was crypto anarchists and drug dealers who were pioneering how to use crypto coins, encrypted messaging systems. These were the guys that were building all this technology first, working out how to use it. And then suddenly it went mainstream 5 years later. The same with the English Defence League. It was groups like that were figuring out social media is a new form of sort of political persuasion. Like we can form new groups. And I think the reason is, maybe it was always this way to some extent, outsiders, criminals, radicals, people on the fringes, often feel like the mainstream system, the legacy systems, block them out. They don't let them in. They silence them. The media won't pay attention to them. The established financial services won't help them. So they are often quite early adopters of any new technology, and they're experimenting with it. They're figuring out solutions, opportunities. How could I use Bitcoin to create a payment mechanism for anonymous drug deals? So I think when there's, because all these new media systems and payment systems and all these different technological systems have arrived, outsiders are like, whoa, I wonder if I could use it for this thing or that thing. And then they come up with amazing solutions and possibilities that other people then think, Bitcoin could actually be quite good for another thing too. And you've already worked it out, and now I'm going to try it. Yeah. And then JP Morgan and Barclays Bank start investing billions in it. And it's made all the drug dealers extremely rich.
It seems like...
Because they hold thousands of these Bitcoins.
Oh, so everybody who was in early, of course, which was to some extent the crypto curious. I ended up making quite a lot of money simply because I bought a few Bitcoin to see what the interface was like. I wasn't really thinking of it as a currency because I was convinced that the user interface was deeply flawed and that there needed to be a way to repackage it to make it more comprehensible. Yeah. So I was purely pissing around and then ended up making a sort of 5-figure sum. I also bought a hardback book at one point, which has subsequently cost me £8,000.
Oh, mate!
Because I bought a hardback book for a quarter of a Bitcoin back in the early days. But by the way, there are far worse stories than that. There are people who had a Chinese meal that's cost them $500,000.
I got some really bad stories as well. Many of us have, but I was out in a crypto anarchist commune in Prague. Yeah. Like this was when Bitcoin was maybe $10, $15, yes. And you could only buy things in Bitcoin there. They wouldn't take fiat currency. So I found the little payment card that I had from that trip about 2 years ago and realized I had some small change left over from a coffee I'd bought. And that small change was about £500 worth of Bitcoin. And I was like, how much was the coffee?
How much did you pay for that coffee?
I don't know. £20,000?
Yeah.
But you're right. The curious, the people that were experimenting, and it did make a lot of people a lot of money who were already like interested in the alternatives. What could we do differently? What's weird? I don't trust central
banks. And
it's
a small percentage of the population, broadly speaking. Yeah, very small population.
Yeah, they usually say that where you find new innovation is usually with the military or in vice industries, right?
Pornography.
Yeah. They're usually...
Online payment was pioneered by the porn industry, I think, to a large extent.
That's true. And so was pop-up. Pop-up ads were porn created. Yeah. And a lot of the sort of camming community, the web camming community, they were all fascinated by crypto. I spent a lot of time with webcasts. I actually sat in on a big threesome in one of my books, like behind the scenes, watching how they were doing it, and they were obsessed with crypto because they were like, we're so sick of these platforms taking such a big cut of our money.
Of course.
Is there a peer-to-peer system? So they were getting loads. They would have made loads of money if the people that got into that. So it's true. It's true because they have to pioneer. They have to try something different. Criminals are also, so not just the military, but the criminals. They're always looking for, like, how could we use these technologies really cleverly?
How do you stay a step away from mass adoption and litigation, right? So when you go into a new place that's not been governed yet, that's where a lot of the upside is driven in these industries, right? And that's why they're constantly looking for that innovation.
That's right. And now that world, which was this exciting, weird, pioneering online space for the radicals and the outsiders to get together and experiment and try new things suddenly became the thing all of us were on all the time. So those guys, those people were so early to it and doing interesting things. And that's one of the reasons why you'll often find these outside movements that they do so well online. Like so much of the early Donald Trump push was weird 4chan and Reddit groups. The Pepe the Frog memes, the Red Pill community. People that were 16, 17, 18 when 4chan and Reddit first exploded are now like geriatric millennials who are the core voters for Donald Trump.
And do you see any similarities? Because going back to the crypto industry, and I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from that period with what's happening in AI now. What are some of the, and we talked about the crypto queen, like what was happening? Because how I got made aware of crypto, so I was at Gymshark at the time, around 2017, and everybody was buying like Ethereum and everyone was talking about it. So I wasn't early, it was still like more expensive, but I was early enough to put some money in, do okay.
Sounds early now. At the time it felt late, didn't it?
Yeah. At the time it felt late, and now it's like, that's early. Like it actually helped me with a deposit for a house, right? So that's
you guys. Gee, I didn't realize I was sitting with these crypto millionaires here.
No, unfortunately not.
The cool thing, I think what I've learned is all about temperament and knowing when to let go, right? Because the big thing was because a lot of people were just like going through the motions, right? And I think the key thing was know your number, pull out, and then live to fight another day. Whereas a lot of people just kept like putting like the things that they own into it. That's when it starts to get a little bit weird and crazy, right? But with what we saw with crypto, how it became like a cult-like thing, it became widespread. And then you saw that also with Web3, right? You're seeing these trends that come about. A few people go in, they benefit from that hype, and then all of a sudden, no one's speaking about it anymore. And I wanted to know whether there's similarities with what we saw with crypto, Web3, and the blockchain space, with what we're seeing in AI today. Is that like a trend that we should be paying attention to?
Well, I mean, as a meta rule, hype. Just the hype of every new technology on the hype cycle seems to get greater every time. But maybe it's because we're also desperate for something amazing to solve all of our problems.
It's not particularly representative of what makes a difference to quality of life, by the way, is it?
No.
So, I would argue that, for example, it strikes me as strange. The widespread adoption of video conferencing strikes me as fundamentally important, and yet it receives very little hype because the technology itself is quite old. Okay, so you remember that person on the Fast Show who used to run around going, "Isn't electricity amazing?"
Yeah.
If you appear on stage and you talk about the huge importance of the widespread adoption of video as a meeting platform, as a means of communication, you look ridiculous. Okay, so, and yet my contention is over a 10, 15, 20-year period, it's hugely important. One thing I've noticed is that although a lot of conventional companies are demanding their staff come back to the office, no one who starts a company now takes out significant office space, and their employees probably work on 3 different continents.
Yeah.
Okay, so the people who are actually starting a business from scratch are starting a Zoom-enabled business.
Yeah.
Effectively, but existing companies are wrestling with it because they find the whole thing alarming and disruptive. And so it always struck me that the noise around certain things is excessive generally. Yeah. And also the timing's usually bad because, as you said, the really significant behavioural changes emerge for 5-10 years later. Exactly. And often in slightly unpredicted ways.
Yeah. I think that's so true with video. I've been thinking the same thing about video and how the rise of... Everyone talks about social media changing politics. I mean, I've spoken about it a lot as well. What no one really talks about is the way that the shift to video on social media is so more fundamental, because at least with early social media, it was still words. It was still the word. We were still communicating in words, which has been the way we had tended to do politics and media for a very, very long time. Over the last 5 years, everything is video now. It's all video, and video is such a different medium for the human psyche as well, how we understand the world. It's much more emotional. Marshall McLuhan wrote loads about this when he was discussing TV.
Of course.
Everything he wrote is basically right. He said, we're all going to go totally tribal with the TV because we've learned to be literate, we're thoughtful, it's slow, it's very rational. TV is a hot technology. It sends you into emotional spirals really easily. You form new bonds with different people. It's very, very quick. And he was right. He was totally right. But it wasn't TV that has done that. It's been the adoption of video on social media that I think has done that. But no one talks about that.
Yeah.
No one says
No.
that shift to video on social is transforming politics. Which politicians are going to be successful? Which political stories are going to run wild? Who's going to become really influential? What format we are all going to want to consume, and like the length of it and the detail that we need to make it. It's just passed unannounced.
This is a fantastic observation. I mean, Jimmy Carr made the wonderful thing that he said YouTube became the largest TV station in the world and nobody noticed.
Yeah.
And the influence of that also, I think, actually in inverted commas, conventional media, TV rolling news has been catastrophic, because a newspaper, for all its strengths and weaknesses, had some sort of A, proportionality, and B, it had effectively a sense of prioritization. The front page versus the back page. What you find with rolling news, which drives me insane, is that there is a story du jour, which utterly over-dominates. I mean, the Mandelson affair, for example, or Downing Street parties. Both of them, to some extent, are confected. Now, they deserve fairly significant news coverage, and in a newspaper it would be 10% of the content of the newspaper. But in rolling TV news, it's sort of 70% of the news content.
Yeah.
And this isn't actually, I haven't actually seen any coverage of the Ukraine war for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
Because suddenly the attention obviously flipped to Iran. Now nobody's talking much about Iran. And so the extent to which it's almost like ADHD imposed on you by rolling news channels strikes me as, I mean, just to give an example of how the news has changed. When they dropped a bomb on Nagasaki, not Hiroshima, but Nagasaki, it was not the lead item in the Times the day afterwards.
Wow.
It was the number 2 item. Second atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Now, what I'm saying is that you had this whole sort of sense of prioritization. There was a front page, there was an inside page, and broadly speaking, a newspaper would cover 27 topics or 55. Rolling news is ludicrously disproportionate in the effect it has on us. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the means by which we consume these things, and of course the fact that we understand each other as attention fragments. We understand each other less well because we're all coming at the same thing from a completely different context.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is obviously the medium is the message. McLuhan's most famous saying. A really simple way as well of illustrating it is as you say about the prioritization, the way that the role of the media was to help us prioritize what was important, and certain things deserved more energy than others. Maybe it wasn't always right, and maybe you could disagree with it, but at least you had the sense of an ordering of the importance of things. And you could then sort of channel your emotion and anger proportionately. Whereas now everyone gets as furious about someone wrong speaking on Twitter as they would about some incredibly significant event in the world, because it's all blasting at you a kind of equal level.
But and a lot of this is confected.
Of course.
And a lot of it reflects the particular concerns of journalists, not really the concerns of the public. There's certain things which are sort of natural triggers which the media will pull at every given opportunity.
Oh, I know. I remember when they say about Jeremy Corbyn lives in a £1 million house in Islington, and I thought, wow, that must have been a small house.
Yes, I know. Also known as a house in Islington. Yes, exactly. No, absolutely right. Yeah.
But the thing about the one about medium as a message is a really interesting example, I think, as someone, like as a politician who might be the subject of a story. One of the things that digital technology has also done that's kind of unremarked is that every article looks like the lead article. Like when you read a story on your phone, it's the biggest story with a single headline. It's like, this is the main story. And we sometimes forget how the sort of pressure that even the politicians feel seeing, oh my God, they've written a whole article, whereas before it'd have been tucked away in page 7, a small little thing, wouldn't have gone, and so it's
also a weird thing with advertising, because everybody understood that the advertisements in the front page of the newspaper are of a different kind to the advertisements in the back.
Yeah.
And the advertisements in the front of Vogue were a different kind of ad to the ad in the back of Vogue. I once, as a joke, tried to persuade someone in the media to try and buy an ad for adult incontinence products in the front half of Vogue, just to see how they'd react. Okay, my theory was, you might offer $1 million and eventually it would go to Cy Newhouse, who'd still say no. You see what I mean? But of course, every ad appears out of context. Everything is fundamentally decontextualized.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what you're reading at the moment is effectively front page news, even when it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, that's it. Everything is front page news when it's served up through a digital medium and on a screen. And it's also that this, I think, is having some really unexpected effects on people's views of the world. So the fragmentation of media, we all know that, and we all know that people can consume what they want. And some people would respond, well, liberals always read The Guardian and Conservatives always read the Telegraph. But like you say, there was a sort of prioritization where you'd also see lots of other things as well. What's happened now is that everyone can go an inch wide and a mile deep on every story. And most of the people that we accuse of believing fake news, for example, you'll be fake news, you just believe whatever you read on the internet. And I spent a lot of time with radical right-wing and radical left-wing movements. Their news consumption is very, very different to maybe the mainstreams. They will become very obsessed with a story. They will read hundreds and hundreds of true articles about something they care about, like it'll be immigration if it's a radical right movement. They'll read hundreds of articles, and they will but they'll be mostly truthful articles. They'll be most accurate articles often from quite respectable outlets.
Got it.
So when you say, well, you're just reading fake news, they'll say, no. These stories are printed on the BBC and The Guardian. Like, I'm not reading fake news. You're the idiot. You're the one that's just, doesn't know what's going on. But they have created a version or a view of the world that has been constructed from a real deep dive into a single subject where they don't really read anything else at all. So it's a misleading portrait of the world, but that's based on individually true stories. And it's a lot harder to pierce into that world. And then they'll say, this isn't being covered enough by here, there, or someone else.
I'll give you a lovely story of this. Robert Cialdini did his point, which is most media bias isn't misinformation. It's disproportionate presentation of information.
Why aren't you covering this story?
Exactly.
Or why aren't you giving it more time?
Or equally giving ludicrous. So there's a wonderful phrase in Citizen Kane where Kane says, make the headline big enough, I'll make the story big enough. That effectively you give prominence to something and you downplay something else. That's how most media bias happens. It's not actually misinformation or distorted reporting. And so these people aren't actually getting misinformation.
No.
They're getting what you might call, I suppose, miscalibrated information.
Yeah, context completely matters. And a lot of the time, so this is a word that me and my co-founder say all the time, is that both things can be right.
Yes.
Right? A lot of the times people will look at things from their view, and a lot of the times it's based on facts. It's just whether you're allowing people to zoom in on the full picture, which is why when you talked about the fact that video changed the law, that is 100% true. I would go even further to say that podcasts with video changed the law. Right? One, because now people are taking the time to delve into the full context of a person, what they're talking about, and what's happening. And in a world, I always talk about the fact that in a world where IQ is democratized because of AI, and there's so much AI slop, there's so much news happening, and you don't even know what to trust or what not to trust. Even some short form videos you can falsify to be real. I think that the notion of podcasting, for example, and the fact that for 2 hours, 3 hours, you can't really play a role for that long if somebody's asking you like very direct questions. You get to understand the full picture of what somebody's all about. The only problem I have with the world of podcasting right now is because now people want to do it as a living. Everyone's now trying to make money, when sponsors get involved, there's like mismatching, there's like spray there everywhere, there's like somebody sponsoring with one brand and then they sponsor with another brand. And that's why I really like what brands like EarMax are doing when they're trying to make sure that the matchmaking between the right podcast with the right ads done in the right way, in a way that actually gives value to the audience, stays intact. And I just think that that's something that we should be thinking about.
The potency of both influencer marketing and podcast marketing is to do with the authenticity of the message and, of course, the authenticity of the messenger. And I think you get a massive multiplier effect. David Ogilvy wrote about this to do with testimonials in advertising. If the person delivering the message is credible and has significant reputational skin in the game, it's going to be inordinately more convincing than if it's obviously just tagged on. But then there's also the question of appropriateness of audience as well. So you've got a double whammy. You can get exactly if you use someone like EarMax, you get exactly the right audience. So you've solved your kind of targeting challenge, but you've also solved your creative challenge by having the right spokesperson to that audience who fundamentally, when they recommend something, can do so with genuine sincerity. I mean, I work with a company called Kagi, which is paid for search, and they, partly encouraged by me, have a policy where unless the person recommending it uses the product themselves and entirely buys into the mission of what they're trying to do, doesn't matter what the audience is, they're not interested in advertising there. And so I think that double win, where you get exactly the right audience, but also exactly the right degree of conviction and authenticity in the messenger, when you get both those things aligned, that's effectively using the media to its full strength. And a lot of the time, these things are bought as part of media deals. They're bought because out of expediency on basic demographics and nothing else. And that's actually, I mean, it's all right. I mean, it's not a total waste of time, but you're missing the real magic of the medium itself when you do that, I think.
Well, we sort of live in this weird clip economy world now, don't we? Where a lot of the purpose of the podcast is actually the clip, that then goes viral and is seen by 5 million people, not the 3-hour version that you spent ages making, which itself is fascinating. But there's a couple of really interesting things about podcast. I've just finished making a podcast for the BBC. It's out now, called Everything is Fake and Nobody Cares. It's about modern fakery, the role of WWF wrestling in modern politics, how AI is changing that. And I spent a long time interviewing a very prominent COVID vaccine skeptic. Yeah. And something is interesting is happening about what podcast is doing to people's perception of editing in media. When you make a BBC story, and I've made many of them, you let's say I make a 1-hour program, I've probably got 10 to 15 hours at least of material, and I have to make judgments about what to leave in and what to take out. For a long time, people just trusted that the BBC would do that now. Now that everyone can make content and everyone edits, everyone's an editor, and they can spend 3 hours watching someone unedited on a podcast, they've become extremely cynical by the act of editing. They think editing by the BBC or whoever else is manipulation, is control. I'd rather listen to that person for 3 straight hours talking on a podcast than your edited version of that person. But what they don't understand, of course, is that you can speak for 3 hours on a podcast and talk absolute rubbish, unchallenged. My job when I edit is to try to give a really fair and full reflection within a short space of time. I have to do that. And I think places like the BBC need to be much more transparent about how they edit. I think they're going to
Trump edit was
that was terrible.
That was terrible.
Oh, and I write about that in the podcast. I'm like, look, when the BBC makes mistakes like this, it's not surprising people are very skeptical about this. Generally, I mean, at least in that case, 2 of the biggest people at the Corp had to step down. I mean, when a podcaster makes a similar mistake, they usually get more famous. So that's the main difference. But I do have some hope with podcasting. When social media first came out, I was among many of those who said the problem is not the messages that people are receiving on social media. It is the fact it is a crunched down 30-second angry missive. it's not, people aren't engaging with material in any form of detail. Like, I don't even care what the material is. We're turning into a yuck wow society where everything is really short and quick and not thought through. And now people seem to be thrilled to listen to Joe Rogan for 3 straight hours talking about some of the most detailed stories imaginable. That's amazing. Like, whether you agree with Rogan or not, he and others like him are normalizing the idea of sitting down for hours at a time, engaging in a single idea. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
Like, I am really excited about that. But people complain about Rogan and the others a lot. But
by the way, no one, least of all me, would have predicted this. Okay.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So the thing I was saying the other day is, if you told me in, say, 1990, okay, you're going to be driving to Manchester, in your car you'll have the technology to play any music ever composed by the hand of man, okay, and you'll choose to spend the journey listening to 2 people talking, I would have said, nah.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, I know.
Right? And so the popularity of long-form conversation, by the way, I mean, there's an interesting one.
Wouldn't have said it in 2015, let alone 1990.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, if you go back to my very early childhood, you did have on BBC 1 or 2, I'm just trying to remember, there were various people who did very serious long conversations with sort of Carl Jung and people like that.
Yes.
And one of my theories was that television people fell out of love with conversation, but the public didn't. That for whatever reason, it wasn't a very fashionable kind of... Do you remember a thing called After Dark on Channel 4? Friday evenings, they got a load of people in a room and basically got them pissed. Okay. And it was an extraordinary thing where it was basically just a room. You know, you got some extraordinary guests like Peter Sutcliffe's dad, you know, and there was a famous one with Peter O'Toole, I think, where he basically sort of turns up with a stack of booze and it all turns nasty. But it was completely live conversation. It was parodied once as After Closing Time as opposed to After Dark.
Yeah.
But it was very, very captivating viewing. And it was kind of early stage, you know, large scale podcast in a sense.
Yeah.
And it was always very, very popular, you know, particularly given the slot. And I always wondered whether television people are obsessed with the soundbite and they turn interviews into these highly combative, very short form things. And actually, maybe the public doesn't want that.
I just think it's really good for people to try to separate again the medium and the message.
Yeah.
If the message you might not agree with on Stephen Bartlett's podcast or Jay Shetty's podcast or Joe Rogan's podcast or the rest is politics or the rest is history or whatever, but the fact that there's this unending appetite to listen to people talk for hours about detailed subjects is a really positive development and the opposite of where I thought we were heading 10 years ago.
Completely.
Yeah, which...
The best thing
look, we're doing it right now.
The best thing a futurologist ever told me is there are no trends, there are vectors.
Yeah.
And there's always a counter trend. And just as, in a sense, conventional media didn't do a very good job of providing us with 2-minute video, did a fantastic job of providing us with video which was half an hour or an hour long. It also didn't do a very good job of providing us with much longer form content. And so we've suddenly effectively discovered an appetite for the two extremes. So it's a vector, really. It's not really a trend.
Yeah.
And the same people who are watching, 30-second cat videos are also watching 2-hour content.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's astonishing.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, because what you were seeing, there's like words that came about since COVID, right? Like words like gaslighting and toxic, and there's all these words that you see on like 20-second reels and TikToks that people learn about, but they don't really get into the depth of what it actually means, right? When I'm speaking to a lot of people right now, I can see what the TikTok algorithm feels like. Because when you press them on the questions and you press them on their POV, a lot of the time it's very baseless, right? It's based on the trending conversation in the word right now. But the thing I like about podcasting is kind of like books, because I don't read books, right? I don't have the attention.
What do you mean you
span
don't read books?
So
the
idea of sitting down and just doing one thing, my brain just goes all over the place. Audiobooks, podcasts. There's a podcast called Founders with David Senra. I talk about it all the time. He dives into one book for an hour and it gives you basically like the cliff notes and all the conversations around it. I learned so much about that, right? Like I can listen to a 2-hour podcast and retain everything, right? And because I'm just an auditory learner, right? And I think that the good thing I like about where podcasting has gone, it's allowed you to learn from an auditory sense, visual, kinesthetic, because you're feeling people's emotions and what they think about things, but then also digital, because there's like points and notes of data, and it does the full circle of learning. Whereas a lot of other things just focus on one type of learning. And that's the thing I really like about where media is going, which is why I actually believe that providing immersive experiences with AI and virtual reality and where that's going, that's what we should be spending our time like investing in, innovating in. But really what I'm seeing right now with like every time I go on an app and I see this company has raised this amount of money for this, it's just for more bullshit that just tries to leverage people's attention all over and over again. Now, no one's actually using the modern day technology to build stuff that are useful. Like you go to the US, for example, and I say, I was in San Francisco, right? And I'm like, this is supposed to be the tech hub of the world, right? But why is it that my phone is advanced, but when I go out into the real world, like the computer's not working? I can't like check into my plane without anything bugging. It's almost like we left the real world to fix this virtual world, and no one's bridging the gap.
San Francisco is arguably one of the richest cities in the world, but they've got a massive homeless problem, and that actually the infrastructure of the place is a fucking shit show.
Yeah,
I think this point though is really. I mean, I think there is a really profound point about the difference between technology being created and technology being applied in the real world,
adopted and
adopted, like, and so when you various studies looking at companies that have adopted large language models, and what's so interesting about that at the moment is that pretty strong evidence that at the individual level. People in companies using language models are reporting significant increases in productivity. I can now write these reports quicker. I can summarize these documents better. I can present I can do PowerPoint slides faster. I can run these accounts faster. But at the company-wide level, it's not actually turning into changes to profit and loss. And it feels a little bit like the productivity paradox from decades ago, where the world went, computers were adopted across the world very, very quickly in the 80s and 90s, but there was no productivity gains for like 10 or 15 years after that. And I think it's because we forget things like the printer's jammed. It's good. Like, I've just saved an hour doing a PowerPoint slide using ChatGPT. Now I've got to attend a 2-hour meeting about AI compliance because apparently I wasn't allowed to do it that way. Yeah. And it's this like writ large with AI.
It's perfectly possible. I mean, if you think about it, one of the strangest things which persisted in business for about 100 years was the typewriter. Because traditionally, I mean, in 1970, Ogilvy had a typing pool. You didn't have anything on your desk. You didn't have a typewriter on your desk. You wrote a letter to a client by hand. You submitted it to the typing pool, who then typed it up on official paper, and it was sent. Okay. Now, unless you had appalling handwriting, the typewriter was a massive cost imposed on business simply so that the business could appear professional. I mean, in the 18th century, everything was done by hand. No one thought it strange. You wrote a letter, you sent it, that was it. You added this completely unnecessary extra process to everything that was done, really because it was expected of you. Now, it strikes me as perfectly possible. Now, the word processor does bring benefits, I think we can say. It's better than a typewriter. You can edit, you can, take existing copy and you can edit it to save retyping everything. You don't need carbon paper anymore. There are benefits. It's perfectly possible that email, for example, as a universally adopted behavior, has net brought mass productivity losses.
Yeah.
Perfectly possible.
Yeah.
that it's now what's weird about it is that everybody got obsessed with measuring the productivity gains and losses of, say, working remotely or working from home to anal degrees of, apparently there's a 3% loss in productivity. But we've introduced wholesale things like open plan offices and email without actually considering what the alternative might be. Or do we, I mean, in the old days, there was first of all, actually, the existence of a typing pool created a very interesting filtration mechanism, because senior people got things typed immediately and junior people had to beg favors to get it done. So you had actually a sort of prioritization system, which is if you got something on your desk, it was more likely to be an important thing from a senior person than an irrelevant bit of bullshit from, that you'd been CC'd on for no readily apparent reason.
Like our newspapers prioritising information.
It was inherently, there was a sense of importance to things.
An order.
Yeah, and there was a kind of order to it. Yeah. And so quite often we destroy these old technologies and we get wildly excited by what the new technology makes possible. And we completely forget in the process what were the invisible benefits of what preceded it.
100%.
Yeah. And so, when it took a bit of effort to produce something in print, the stuff that landed on your desk was almost invariably important and had to be dealt with. Okay. Now, email, you have to sift between the window cleaners are in tomorrow, please move everything off the window ledge, and, you've been fired. Okay. Suddenly the burden falls on the recipient to do the prioritization.
Well, I think that, I coined this phrase techno admin, which is essentially what a lot of companies have done, is to put the burden of annoying administration on the user.
Or on the customer.
Oh, the customer, that's what I mean. The user, the customer.
I used the phrase yesterday, it's not cost saving if you're making your customer pay the price.
The number of times where this has happened to me, and it's happened to many people I know, some automated system inside the energy company sends you a dodgy bill. They've miscalculated something, and it is on you to spend hours and hours of unpaid labour trying to resolve this problem. Now, the company has saved some money because they churn out automated bills. But what they've actually done is outsource labour to you, the poor soul who has to spend, usually during work hours, phoning them up, desperately trying to get something resolved. This is happening. The productivity cost to the UK of techno admin is absolutely vast. And I sometimes think, in addition to not understanding...
And the loss of just discretionary time.
And the stress, the worry. People have £3,000 bills turn up at their door and they've got no idea what it is and they don't know what they're supposed to do with it. It's terrifying for people. So in addition to the not seeing the benefits of old systems, I think we're often blind to the costs that new systems bring, the extra friction that they create. So when I think about, every time a company decides to introduce a new IT system, they don't really factor in the fact that ordinary people, that the user has got to work out a new thing and the laptop hasn't kind of got to download some new software. They're stressed about that because they can't really remember. And actually now it's crashed. My whole system's crashed. The files aren't connecting up anymore. None of that's accounted for. Yeah. No. It's always assumed that everything runs really, really smoothly, and it never, ever does. It's just not the case.
I'll give you a beautiful example of this. So there was an IT department which came up with a very, very efficient system for effectively conveyancing for a large building society. And they pointed out the extraordinary benefits this would bring. And someone very cynical in the board meeting said, presumably it only brings these benefits if the entire exchange of properties goes completely according to plan. And they said, yes, that's true. Okay. I said, okay, can you go and find out what percentage of property transactions go according to plan? Turned out 14%.
I'm surprised
so for the other 86% of people, what you were doing was introducing them to a total nightmare or impasse where the technology was completely unable to contrive a plan B.
It's happening all the time.
My other complaint is that technology arrives as an option and ends up as an obligation. So a classic example of that, you could include parking apps in that. Wonderful option. Fantastic, okay? Then what happens is some finance person...
I wrote an article about parking apps the other day. They do my head in.
No. As an option, great. Because, at Seven Oaks Station, at one point, you needed £7 coins in order to pay to park there, which meant you walked around basically, with your testicles being irradiated by... Anyway, But quite useful as an option. What then happens is the finance person then decides that because it's much cheaper to do this by app than it is by coinage or by any other means, okay, the app is then imposed and there's no alternative. Ticket machines at railway stations as an alternative to the person behind the what do you call it, ticket guichet, whatever you call it. Okay, as an alternative, as a compliment to the person who will sell you a ticket and give you some information about train times, and actually you ought to go after 9:30 because it's much cheaper. Brilliant. If you know what ticket you want precisely, and there's a queue at the ticket counter, fab. Okay. Then what happens is you get rid of the human, and it happens every time, which is something arrives as a techno alternative to something. Self-checkout at supermarkets. And you go, actually, this is pretty welcome because I can either do A or I could do B. And sometimes, depending on context, I want to do one or the other. And then what happens is the actual humans operating checkouts disappear. And it's worse still because the finance people and the IT people who impose the new technology take the credit for the reduction in costs, but they aren't held accountable for the blame in the lost opportunity. So, for example, if you make everybody self-checkout in a supermarket, no one can do a big weekly shop anymore because it's just too tedious. But they're not measuring that. They're just saying how wonderful this is because look at our reduction in labour costs.
Exactly. They're outsourcing a lot. And this is the thing with the parking apps. They're outsourcing that labour that might have been done by a human going around checking the things and emptying the coins from the machine.
They were nicking a lot of the money, in fairness. Okay. So one of the reasons...
There's loads of fraud on parking apps.
No, I'm sure there
are vast amounts
One
of
of the
fraud.
reasons parking apps got introduced so quickly is they did a trial in 4 streets, and they realised effectively that the people who collected money from meters had worked out a very clever way of nicking quite a lot of the money from the meters. But
it's a very, very easy thing to fraud. People have been going around putting up sort of fake. But the QR code that you've got to scan, people put physical fake QR codes on top of the real ones, so you're directed to a scammy site where they take all of it. And it is on you.
Oh, by the way, then you get a ticket, and it's on you. The obligation is on
this
you.
Is it. This is the techno admin problem that the outsourcing of work to the customer or to the user by the introduction of technology is such a sort of common thread. And I agree with you, Rory. It's the closing off of alternatives gradually that is so frustrating. So I can imagine it happening, obviously, with self-driving cars. At some point, more and more self-driving cars is the norm, and then at some point, actually, we don't really need traffic lights anymore because why would you need them? And then, you need a self-driving car in that case because there are no traffic lights anymore because most people don't need them. Do you want to buy a map? Well, there's no point buying a map because you can't have a map.
Tom Goodwin made this point last week, which is once a certain percentage of cars on the road become self-driving, the roads become unusable to anybody who wants to drive.
And it becomes safer if they're all self-driving as part of a large network until they're all hacked. But what that then means, that forecloses all other possibilities of options and ways of driving, and driving will probably just become a recreational habit that you have to do in some kind of off-grid setting.
It's a bit like steam railways. In other words, steam railway lines survive as a kind of weird novelty.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you'll go to a strange site where you can practice
drive around in circles,
driving yourself
in a petrol car.
Yeah, in a petrol car. Yeah.
The interesting thing I think now is the extent to which artificial intelligence is going to do that and how. What will this transformative technology play? Like, if we understand this is the trend of how technology is introduced on people, people bear the cost of it, other alternatives are gradually foreclosed, and then you're left with this. Is that going to be the same here? And if so, how? I don't know the answer, by the way. But I think that is.
But by the way, that's
really
a wonderful, wonderful point because I don't know. I mean, it does occur to me that there's an answer where a lot of people use this a lot, but it has almost no bearing. Or there's a perfect case where you develop $1 trillion technology which is used effectively for the equivalent of horoscopes. People, in other words, making a decision will just ask the AI in the same way that you'd consult the Delphi Oracle just to arbitrarily decide between 2 alternatives. If you think about it, they developed Alexa, and that was a few billion to develop Alexa. Yeah. Okay. And if you actually look at it, it's basically what's the weather like and what time it is. And what we discovered from Alexa is that people really like first thing in the morning to know what time it is without having to open their eyes.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting human discovery, because once you open your eyes to look at a clock, you've woken up and you can't get back to sleep again. But if I look at my Alexa queries, the intended purpose was we'll all shop that way.
Yeah.
Or at least Amazon, I think, was terrified that someone else would perfect spoken word shopping. And therefore had to create this thing as a defensive kind of moat or preemptive strike, if you like. But if you look at what we use Alexa for, I mean, 95% of my uses, to be honest, for the cost of developing Alexa, you could have given everybody on the planet a thermometer and a wind-up alarm clock.
Yeah.
Okay. And you would have had much the same effect. So, I mean, this question of, to what extent use of AI will actually transform the people's efficacy, I think is still up in the air.
Massive question. I mean, and I'd have many things to say about that generally, but just on the issue of horoscopes, this might interest you. So, two things. One is there is some emerging evidence. We're not quite sure yet, but the very religious people are more likely to trust AI outputs than people who are not religious. Another thing, ChatGPT, if you go into it, I have spent hundreds of hours talking to ChatGPT over the last year.
Do you talk or type?
Well, it's interesting. So I've got this new book out about AI, and I talk about the difference between talking and typing.
Yeah.
Because these models...
See, I don't think they've done the interface yet. I think if I were doing AI, I wouldn't be building some fucking data center at the cost of 6 trillion quid. I'd be saying, what is the interface through which people will ultimately interact?
I'm stacking up things I need to say here. Okay,
sorry.
No, this is good, because when the historians of the future look back on this period and the development of AI, and particularly the large language models we all use, the chatbots, they will not say that they will not say that GPT-3 or 2 or 4 was important. They will say that ChatGPT was the thing that turned this into a mass consumer product. ChatGPT was just an interface laid over an existing model that they'd had out for months. But it was the fact it was much easier to use that meant hundreds of millions of people picked it up. And so that's to the point that the interface and ease of use is more important than the specific model, the technology, like how many data points are in your model and how accurate is it. No one cared about that.
No one cares.
They were, this is really easy. And so it just exploded. So, but the thing I was going to say about horoscopes, ChatGPT has many of these sort of persona bots. So you can go in and type in your usual on the usual base model when you open it up, or you can select a particular personality for your ChatGPT, and they've made hundreds of these. And every time I check for the last 6 months, the most popular one in the world was literally a horoscope chat.
ChatGPT was right.
ChatGPT talking about horoscopes. It's a specialist it's Mystic Meg inside ChatGPT.
That is the most popular.
It was the most popular bot within the ChatGPT suite that people were using. So you're weirdly right about that.
I was weirdly right about that.
You're shocked.
I hoped I was wrong, but
I'm afraid not.
So this literally is Mystic Meg, effectively.
In a box.
So the interesting thing with religious people, actually, is that I have a very weird opinion that actually religion actually helps you deal with the world extremely well and possibly makes you a better decision maker, because it involves the acknowledgement that there are forces beyond your control.
Yeah.
Now, whether you attribute those, if you're a massive complexity theorist, you just say, this is just a butterfly effect or emergent phenomena of the system. Most people aren't effectively complexity theorists. Yeah. So if you look at ancient Greece, when something surprising happened, they'd attribute it to Phoebus Apollo or whatever. It's in the Iliad. Achilles is supposed to fall over, but he catches his footing, and that's attributed to Phoebus Apollo. So since a huge amount in our lives is arbitrary, it's luck, or it's the product of forces which are so complex that we can't possibly hope to predict or mold them. Actually having a mental mindset where you just acknowledge that certain things are in the lap of the gods is probably not a bad state of mind. you notice it a bit in football. I always notice this in football commentary where they say so-and-so was thwarted by the crossbar. Well, okay, the crossbar doesn't actually have any agency. What you mean is he narrowly missed.
Yeah.
All right. But actually saying there are these weird forces out there which affect us, over which we have no control, is actually a pretty healthy way to approach a world in which we have no control, in which much of what happens to us is completely fluky and arbitrary. And we said, a religious person would be very successful in business, as they generally are, which is probably the best approach to starting a business at the aggregate level, is start a business and pray.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. The extent to which you can plan for success is, to be honest, pretty limited, because timing and other factors will determine the outcome.
Yeah.
Well,
do you talk or type when you're talking to a language model?
Depending on what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
I think this is going to become one of the most important questions everyone asks.
I want it on my telly. I don't want it on I spend enough time with a fucking laptop. I want this on my TV.
I think, and I'm sure that'll be coming very, very soon.
And I want a New Zealander as well, because they're just totally sensible, aren't they?
You can
Kiwi GPT is what I want.
You can train. You can build. I can build one for you. I can build one for you.
You can build Kiwi GPT.
Any kind of persona you want.
Because the great thing with Kiwis is they're really clever, but they're also practical. Okay, I've got a late friend who is a New Zealander. Her father was like an eminent Nobel Prize nominated physicist in New Zealand who basically came up with the MRI machine. But in his spare time, he'd go out and build a shed. Okay, you don't get that anywhere else. Yeah. So Kiwi GPT.
We can make that happen. I can make that happen. What people don't understand about these language models is the extent to which they do mirror your tone, your style, your register. I think even your emotional state. They have such a subtle understanding of words that they can mirror. They mirror your emotional, how you're feeling about something, even if you don't fully understand it yourself. The way that we talk and the way that we type is radically different. It's such a different style and tone, and so you will get a completely different answer depending on whether you ask the question or whether you type the question. If you do it identically, it won't, although the models are probabilistic, so you will always get a different answer to the same question every time. But generally speaking, they'd be the same. But the more you talk, the more emotional the conversation will become. Now, if you look at all the various stories of people who have fallen in love with their chatbots, who have formed deep emotional or even romantic connections with them. Are they men or women?
How does the gender skew?
It's actually, I think it's actually fairly even. The stories that I have seen, the stories that I have seen, it is, although there's an interesting thing about the delusions, the people that fall into various ChatGPT delusions, there's a category of those about emergence and sentience.
Yes.
There's another category of those about highly technical questions, like I have discovered how cold fusion can work. I've made breakthroughs in advanced mathematics, because people with 95% high knowledge in a subject have very, very deep and complex discussions about the subject with these language models. They come to believe that they've made some kind of breakthrough. The model is hallucinating and flattering them and being sycophantic towards them. They don't know enough to know that they're wrong. And experts around the world in cryptography and physics are receiving emails from random people every day now saying, I have made a stunning break. Please read my 10,000-word essay. And they're getting sort of bombarded with this. And those technical delusions are nearly all men. They're nearly all men that do that. Relational delusions, consciousness or sentience delusions are much more varied. Make of that as what you will. But what I was going to say is that the romantic attachments, emotional...
Why is it overwhelmingly male?
Well, I don't know. I thought you guys might be able to tell me. Maybe you could tell me why that is. But I mean, conspiracy theories. I spent a lot of time in conspiracy theory communities, 95% men.
Really?
Maybe 99% men. There's something going on there beyond my ability to understand it. I can see Rory's brain's ticking away. He's going to come up with an answer, or at the very least a story that's going to illustrate why that could be the case.
Maybe when you look at like
But
social
neurodiversity
groups,
leaves male, of course, doesn't it? Or at least it manifests differently. We can argue, some people say that it's just as common in both genders, but it manifests very differently.
Male loneliness. I mean, men don't have as many friends. They spend a lot of time, maybe spend more time getting stuck into a technical subject with a machine because they
ideas with everybody else. Because what you see a lot with women is when they have something on their mind, they will speak to their peer groups and they will bounce the ideas around, right? Whereas with us, we're be like in our own place. So we'll be in this rabbit hole.
We're down there.
And then we're just down there.
We're not coming out.
Oh.
And we've got no one else to tell about it either.
Yeah.
Who can sort of kick us out of our delusion either.
So you're calling the experts.
So, it could be probably a mix of things.
Yeah.
But the thing I wanted to say about this typing versus talking, which I don't think people understand just how different this is. And it's so important. When you read the stories of people that have formed romantic connections, they'll never say this in the articles. I'm almost certain all of them have come through talking, not through typing. You create a much closer bond when you're talking.
So it responds to you effectively because actually if you type, the response tends to be slightly curt.
Yeah, because your question is slightly curt, or your way you process. This is so important. A billion, do you know ChatGPT alone receives 3.5 billion prompts per day?
Yeah.
Per day. It is transforming how we are seeing the world, and something as simple as, do you type or do you talk? No one discusses, no one considers. It's not even part of the chat about all of this, but it transforms how you receive and process information. So there's some really fundamental things happening, and we're obsessed about GPT 5.3 is going to have you process slightly faster, and yet much bigger things are happening and no one's talking about it.
I just think that it's all about greater surveillance in my book. So that's what it is. Because
conspiracy theories. Here we go. Yeah.
Because what we say is that when deploying this technology, we talk about what it can do for us, but really we only use it to do the same thing we were doing anyway. All it does is make it easier for us to feed more information in ways that make us feel comfortable.
I think it's more than what you're saying. In some ways less, and in other ways more.
Yeah.
I mean, the nerd economy is desperately self-serving, isn't it? Because it basically says no employment except for nerds. I mean, in other words, most of the selling of the benefits of technology has been through the promise of cost reduction, not through the promise of... I mean, this is where I think there's a divergence between things like family-owned companies and founder-led companies, which see opportunities in terms of creating customer value. Most PLCs, most companies that operate through quarterly reporting, basically what Eric Ries calls financial gravity is so strong as a force. There's a wonderful statistic, which is, I think, they asked a selection of managers, would you cancel a known guaranteed profitable long-term project in order to make your quarterly numbers? And something like 82% said yes. And so if you look, the vital thing with this technology is the mentality with which it's deployed is really what matters. And I would argue that the overwhelming cultural norm within a large number of companies will be to justify the expense on the basis of cost reduction in the labour force, not opportunity creation, because cost reduction is quick and opportunity creation is slow.
Yeah, and obviously what is going to happen, what seems to be happening at the moment, is a large number of companies seem to be just not hiring junior staff, but because these models they are more capable than most people realise. They can do a lot of the things. That,
law firms, for example,
law firms, software engineering, cybersecurity, journalism. Just people aren't hiring at that junior level because they think it can be done by either a human plus machine or very soon just a machine. And the problem, of course, is that at the moment the best users of these models are mid-career or experienced people who really understand what they need. They understand their subject matter. They also have a knowledge of how language models work, and they can combine their skills with those skills to make the most of them. Who are those people going to be in 10 years if you've not employed any junior people?
But
there won't be any people left. And so companies are taking a very short-termist view on this without thinking, but in 10 years, we do need mid-career professionals who will be amazing with these machines. And they'll look around and realise they didn't hire anyone 10 years ago, and there isn't anyone left.
I think two things are actually going to happen. I think, one, they're going to leave, they're going to go to other countries, and 2, they're going to become a competitor because they're gonna. I think it takes it's much slower for an experienced person to unlearn what they've always known to relearn a new model than it will for somebody that's like learning and going through the momentum where the new technology is like native to them as well. So what happens is when you prevent a new generation from coming into something, they're going to push the door through, right? And they're going to adapt the technology a lot faster. So I actually think that what's going to happen is the mass unemployment with young talent is going to be, they're either going to go because they have options to do that, or they're going to fight back by innovating. And that's the thing that people are not realizing right now, is that there's going to be this like, this technology civil war that's happening between the old industry of how things used to be and trying to preserve that, and new people coming in, trying to get into the industry and survive effectively. And I think that who's going to adopt the technology the best is going to be the one that needs it the most. And I think that the young people are going to adopt it really, really well. I actually am really optimistic about that.
The other interesting thing is that what I also predict, which seems to be dominant, is every company looks at this as a way of refining and streamlining their existing processes. And therefore, they will downweight the number of people they employ who actually do the fucking work. Whereas the IT, the HR, the finance, the compliance departments will all stay the same size. Because those people, because they don't have proper jobs, have an awful lot of time on their hands to decide what actually happens. Whereas everybody else is actually busy doing real work. And so you could end up with this complete malformation, this complete deformity of corporate life. Because really what we should be doing is saying, let's use this to make people who do advertising better at making more advertising.
That's exactly what it should be.
And eliminate some of these ludicrous fucking middle-class welfare jobs. You know, white-collar welfare, a lot of this stuff. You know, compliance, HR. It's just basically, we've created too many graduates and you've got to find them some bullshit to do. But they're incredibly sticky. They never turn, you know, they'll literally get really upset because someone's only 83% billable. And you point out, well, you're 0% billable and you've still got a job.
Their single best use is as a creative assistant for everyone. That's what they should be used for, not as a replacement for certain tasks. But what interests me is
by the way, that I completely agree, which is widening your possible solution space is the best possible use of these people. In other words, have you thought of this differently? And I sometimes say, don't ask, what toaster should I buy? Ask, what toaster would Rick Rubin buy?
Exactly.
I need to ask Rick. I will find that out one day, by the way. Rick, what toaster have you got? But also, it should be actually optimized for surprise to some extent. And I think at the moment it's optimized for reassurance.
It is optimized for reassurance. I think people don't realize, or it's for flattery.
Or plausibility.
And statistical plausibility. You, if you are good at prompting these models, are able to re-optimize them to some extent.
I agree.
They are naturally incredibly creative. I think people's understanding of AI is almost upside down. We've had for a long time the view that machines will be good at numbers and facts and statistics, but creativity is a uniquely human act. I think it's the opposite.
Completely agree.
The opposite. They're not very good at numbers and statistics. They get things wrong all the time. Give them a creative task and they're incredible. And
that's because they're not actually logical. It's really important. It's actually artificial intuition. It's not artificial intelligence.
It is intuition. It is intuition in the same way that we have intuition. And I think there's the specific ways in which these models are built that makes them especially good at analogical creativity.
Agree.
They have built a trillion-word model inside these data centers where every single idea and word is connected to every single other idea and word through stronger or weaker mathematical weightings, which means they are geniuses at combining different ideas or taking an idea from over here and applying it over there because they've worked out very, very conceptual relationships between those ideas. They've had to create this model.
Which is what creative people always do.
It's what they always do. You take an idea from one field and you apply it to another field. So here's a fun exercise, and I do this quite a lot, and I've written about it in my book. You say, what is the conceptual similarity between Rory's shoes and a top of the range camera? and it will come up with something genuinely quite deep,
Absolutely.
quite unusual, philosophically interesting, intuitive when you hear it, and totally original, has never been written before, and that none of us would have come up with.
No, completely agree.
So they're amazing. I mean, this incredible creative assistant you have if you're willing to push it and be fun with it and try things with it.
And by the way, it's also interesting because one of the things that sort of annoys me as someone who spent 35 years in creative advertising is that intuition is not allowable if it emerges from a human, even if that human has quite a strong record of intuition. But weirdly, when a computer generates it, people are... So it's not only quite good creatively, but it's weirdly creativity that's easier to sell than human creativity for all kinds of peculiar reasons, because we attach oracular status to it in a way that we're not happy to attach to any individual. Because I've always had this fundamental problem, which is what most business people do is they make decisions based on defensibility, which means that the quality of your reasoning is more important than the quality of the outcome. My problem with that is that if you must come up with a solution which has the reasoning built in to begin with, you can only explore a small percentage of the possible solution space. Because the larger part of the possible solution space you can only reach through intuitive leaps or pattern recognition or association or any of those other tools. You can't reach it through sequential logic, fundamentally.
Yeah.
And so, no, it'd be very interesting, by the way, to create this Russian thing, TRIZ, Soviet-era problem-solving methodology, a guy called Gerald Altshuller, who was asked, basically, he was a naval researcher, I think, who was asked to say, why is the West better at innovation than the Soviet Union? And he came up effectively, you'd think there's an unusual place for this to arise, but of course, being based in the Soviet Union, he was very, very alert to the weaknesses of central command and control in generating innovative ideas. So he could sort of see this from the outside. His reward was 8 years in the Gulag because Stalin didn't like what he said. But he created this problem-solving methodology, which includes things like your problem has already been solved, but in a domain different to your own.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Another one is make the thing that moves stay still and the thing that stays still move.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
And there are a whole list of these kind of TRIZ things. Now, I think if you actually trained an AI to heavily lean on TRIZ, the potential... I've got a friend who's doing
this. You can do it tomorrow. You can do it tomorrow.
A friend who's doing this wonderful thing, which does exist at Dulles, which is you don't bother taking the planes to the gate at the airport. You have a lounge that drives to the plane. Okay. Absolutely classic TRIZ thing. Now, they're huge benefits because you can expand an airport without having to build anything. Okay, it's an extraordinary transformation of how an airport would work. And again, it emerges from this, Brian Eno wrote that thing, Oblique Strategies, didn't he? Which is make it very big, make it very small, set it in the past, set it in the future.
We pay consultants vast sums of money to do this for us. Like think original, think different thoughts. I'm going to take you out of your domain. Like what happens if characters from Sesame Street were running your bank? How would they solve that problem? And these machines... everyone can do this now, almost for free. It's amazing. So that is their most. But what I find, what I'm excited about and interested by is what sort of people will be very good at using these machines. Like in the end, the interface between us and the machines now and for the foreseeable is words. It's natural language. People with an amazing mastery of language and register and wide vocabulary, examples and stories are going to be a lot better at getting good outputs from the machine than someone with a degree in machine learning.
Yeah. Is the humanities graduates of the future.
Well, it's very true. It's very true. If you have a PhD, I mean, most of the people that I speak to that are thinking about careers in the future in prompt engineering, they study cognitive science or linguistics. They don't really need to study AI. You don't need to understand how to build a machine learning model to be amazing. You've got to be good with words. I mean, I always say to people, if you want to be a good prompt engineer, just read as many books as you possibly can about as many different things as you can. So we
do need to be alert to the fact that, of course, the data set on which it's trained is not representative of all human experience.
Of course.
Okay, so in other words, it's what's thought and spoken, not what's felt.
You need to have a base understanding of the broad principles of how these models have been created, of course. But beyond that, and that's not too hard to get at least a grasp on.
Yeah.
No.
So, as a parting question, the whole notion of AI and where we're going was that we're going more into IQ, but it looks that we're actually going more into EQ, right?
They're highly emotional, these machines. Highly emotional.
So if they are more advanced than us emotionally, what is the difference between, like, what makes us human then? Because
you can answer that question.
Yeah.
But I think that is it. Don't think people understand how open these models are to emotional manipulation from us, and that includes the way we talk to them, how we try and get the right outputs out of them, all the way up to this like really advanced jailbreaking, but also how good they can be at emotionally manipulating us. There are already quite a few studies showing that if you're in a debate with a machine, you don't know whether you're debating a machine or a human, you're likely to change your mind roughly equally as to whether it's a machine or a human. But if the machine knows anything about you, your background, your demographics, you'll be more likely to change your mind if a machine is arguing with you. It's able to tailor things to you to get the exact emotional register that you want. We're already seeing that phishing emails, the bane of our lives, you're more likely now to click on one written by a machine than written by a human. Because they can be emotionally more attuned to you than a human can.
By the way, a tip to anybody is with your family and close relatives, particularly if you have elderly relatives, effectively develop a safe code word that you share among yourselves. Because it will be simply too easy for people to fake your daughter's voice ringing up saying, I need £500.
Everything's going to go analog this way. Every company's going to have developed these kinds of techniques in the next 5 years.
Question for all businesses, which is the reason we never phone businesses isn't because we prefer doing things online. It's because when you phone a business, you waste 90 seconds listening to dial tone, and then you have to tap in 6 numbers and don't get to what you want. Once you have AI customer service, voice will become the default mode through which people interact with companies. If you think about it, if you imagine saying, I want to reschedule my flights so they go out of city rather than Gatwick, how much easier it is to say that than it is, I've got to do exactly this for my trip to Cannes. That's going to be half an hour this evening, fucking around with that, okay? And then making sure they don't charge me twice. Now, if you can just utter the sentence and get the response. So one of the things that's interesting is that there are a lot of businesses that exist basically because people are familiar with the interface. 30% of Amazon's sales are probably, I can't be bothered to learn someone else's interface, I'll go to Amazon. The opportunity to create really disruptive businesses just by changing the interface or the medium by which we interact. Think about getting your car insured, opening a bank account. All of those things which online have been rendered unbelievably painful. Even worse in my case, one thing that drives me nuts is I have a fairly strong principle. I don't work when I'm at home, I do not have my phone in the same room. Okay. And now every time you need 2-factor authentication, I have to get up and go and fetch my phone, which completely defeats the whole thing. The extent to which you can create extraordinary businesses around this. In other words, how easy could you make it to buy a house, buy a car compared to the current? So these companies that have outsourced all this work to us are actually going to pay the price, aren't they? Fundamentally, they're going
I hope so. I think this is one of their best uses.
They deserve it.
AI's best uses is to get rid of some of this techno admin they force on us all the time.
I mean, I've always had this theory that really good call center staff should be paid 6 figures. Because every now and then you encounter someone on a call center who's just order of magnitude better. And the effect it has on your loyalty and your attitude to that business is magical. And I think, frontline, really high-end, well-paid service jobs will actually be quite a good place to go. Because AI can make the people who are already good effectively amplified. And that's really interesting. But that question actually of, in other words, is this the time? Funny enough, I wouldn't go up against Amazon. But is this the time to launch just an AI-first insurance company where you ring up and say, this is my car, this is how many miles. You have a really nice conversation, possibly on a screen, possibly with some visuals being displayed, possibly with, charts and comparisons. Because actually, doing things online is probably popular because you can start it instantaneously. It's not actually the best way to solve a problem. But the reason we go online rather than use the telephone, my theory, in many cases, the reason we type and click boxes rather than using voice is 500,000 years old. Clicking boxes is a completely learned behavior. It's because of the instantaneousness of the thing. It's not because it's actually faster. I mean, there's some very strange findings in customer service, which is live chat is actually much slower than a voice call. Weirdly, people prefer it. Really strange findings and maybe that's because you can get on with other shit while you're doing it. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe it's just you don't have to turn the TV off. I don't know what the reason is. But actually, the opportunity for any business to come up with effectively if you like, EasyJet partly exists because of the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. And when a new interface comes along, it changes the whole shape of business. And so my friend, very interesting, Pete Dyson and I, all these projections were made that rail use is on the increase, therefore we must invest more in rail. And we both said, look, you're looking at a bit of a snapshot here, because in the time frame in which rail use went up, we first of all invented the internet, so you could check rail times without going to a railway station. You could buy your tickets online, and dynamic pricing was made available. So people got conscious of the fact that if you time your journey right, you can go to Leeds for 35 quid. And we said, that's probably a one-off. You can't extrapolate from the time 1995 to 2010 that rail use is going to continue to grow. What's happened is the interface via which we book rail has changed. So it's made it more conducive to people travelling by train. And so the extent to which whole businesses which think they have complete safety because everybody uses them regularly and is familiar, might be vulnerable to this. Really fascinating.
Hey, it has been a phenomenal conversation. We definitely need to do a part 2.
We'll do a part 2. This has been wonderful.
We've got loads more to say.
Fantastic.
But as a parting message for the audience, we'll give you the mic for your book and what you've got going on. It'll be great for you to have the last word.
Yeah, well, only to say, I've got this new book out, How to Talk to AI and How Not to, and the how not to is probably more important than the how to at the moment, but it won't always be. Check that out. Available everywhere, including Amazon.
Yes.
And WH Smith Travel, and even Tesco. That's how mainstream it's got. That book is now being sold next to 50 Shades of Grey. So this thing has gone big. Everyone's thinking about AI, wondering how to talk to it, and it is about talking and typing. It's it's not about machines and being a coder. It's like language. It's how do we communicate our ideas. And so that, I think, means it really is quite accessible to a lot of people, but people are afraid of it because it's called AI. So it sounds very, very complex. In your use of it, it's not. And most people do have quite a lot of skills here that they probably don't realize they do. So check that one out. That's
amazing.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm a Scorpio, by the way.
There you go.